Good morning, or afternoon, or evening if you're watching this in the future recording. So we're going to be moving on through Genesis. Now, I know that it's common for Genesis to be taught really fast. Like, this is what happened on day 1. This is what happened on day 2, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. But it's also good to take time to recognize a lot of things. One is to recognize the pattern. My pastor pointed out how God always does things in order. So when God is working in a place of order, I just realized my mic's a little farther than I intended it to be. When God puts things in order, he didn't create, let's see, he didn't, in verses 11 through 13, he didn't have the earth bringing forth grass and the herb yielding seed before he separated land from water. Even though he could have, he works in order. He does things in an organized fashion. And as beings created in his image, we will do ourselves much good if we focus on trying to do things in an organized manner. A lot of times we get frustrated when we're trying to accomplish goals that we've set. For instance, let's say we have a goal set to write a book about our family history, whether that's for sale or just for the family to enjoy together. Well, if you say, I'm going to write a book this year, but you've not organized it, you will quickly recognize, well, I've got to put the words on a physical paper at some point. So maybe you don't have a typewriter, or maybe you don't have a computer, maybe you don't have a phone where you're typing things in. Well, that would mean the first step is at least getting pen and paper. And then perhaps you're going to handwrite. That's how my mother wrote her book, by the way. She handwrote it. And then she put that in the hands of someone who could transcribe it. And then that person typed it out. And then we put it into the hands of an editor, several editors. And so you see what I'm saying? You've got to organize things. And we see that modeled in creation. And when we take time, rather than just read Genesis super fast, this happened and this happened and this happened and it was good. When we really take time to read it and study it, we can learn about things that we should have understanding of. And so you need to go back and look at the previous recordings of when we talked about the heaven being created, the angels, when we talked about light and darkness. There was some really nice insight into that. So we're going to look at 6 through 8. Now, as we begin to look at verses 6 through 8, I want to point out something, and that is that the creationists, which is what Christians who believe in this book being your guide for salvation, if you believe in this book as having the plan for your eternal soul, for how to conduct yourself on this earth, then you need to believe that this book is absolutely accurate. There is no error in this book. And so if you're going to believe that, then you're going to need to recognize that modern science tries to push the theory that the earth is billions of years old. And I am not a scientific person. I really actually don't even enjoy the study of science. But what I do enjoy is when I'm needing to defend the creation, I do enjoy hearing what scientists in that field have to say. And that's something to remember. If your kid is into dinosaurs, you're going to immediately run into the idea that the earth is billions of years old. And that's how long ago it was when they were, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, before they were extinct. Billions of years, millions of years. Creationists believe that the earth is approximately 6,000 years old. Now, when I say approximately, in the gauge of before things were written down, before we had before humans had calendars, when I say approximately, that could be within a couple thousand years. So the earth could be possibly 8,000 years old. But we tend to put it in these 2,000-year-old lumps of time. And so creationists, if you're a Christian and you believe this specific chapter, Genesis chapter 1, then your faith is supposed to be in the fact that the earth is about 6,000 years old. You'll need somebody else smarter than I am and more studied in science when it comes to creation to know. A good place of resource is the Ark Encounter. There is, oh my goodness, when my kids were in elementary school, oh, I'm hoping his name will come to me while I am, Hovind. I think it's Hovind. Ken or Kent Hovind. Man, he was a great resource for studying creation in argument with the theory of evolution. You've got to remember that creation requires faith, but so does the idea that the earth is billions of years old. Now, people who believe that the earth is billions of years old, they're going to try to say we have something physical to date it. And it's dating rocks through, oh my word, I actually wrote this down. Let me see. I thought I wrote this down the other day. Did I write it on a different piece of paper? Oh, man. I'm so sad I didn't write it down. Oh, I did. Radiometric rock dating. Woohoo! Yay, Denee. I wrote it down. Radiometric rock dating is one of the methods that they use to say that the earth is billions of years old. And there are scientists with the same level of degrees in the same fields who find flaws in radiometric rock dating. And so both believing in creation as having a divine creator and believing in evolution, both of them are faith. Both of them are religions. Don't let the world make you feel dumb because you believe the earth is approximately 6,000 years old. Both require faith. Now, they're going to have a lot more publications, but if you will do, barely any scratching of research, you will find the scientists and the people who are teaching the arguments that we have for believing the earth is about 6,000 years old. So, when you're looking at the earth being about 6,000 years old, you're going to need to know that for the first 2,000 years of humanity existing, so Genesis, there was about roughly, again, we say roughly for a lot of reasons, and one of them is going to be because there are differing calendars. Every conqueror had a calendar that they forced the people that they conquered to live by. That's why, and actually that is the case to this day. If there are a lot of you who know I have Asian friends. Well, the Asians, though for business reasons, they may live by what our Roman calendar is right now. The calendar we live by is a Roman calendar. But they actually have a different New Year than we do. And it's celebrated exactly the way we celebrate our New Year, but it's a different day every year. It just depends on how the moon is. And so the way the Asians have a unique calendar from the Roman calendar that we're using today, that has happened through all of history. The Aztecs had a different calendar. The Babylonians had a different calendar. We see Moses, whenever God brings them out of Egypt, God gives them a different calendar. So because of these differing calendars through history, that's why we need to say roughly. We need to say it was about 2,000 years. You've got to put those 2,000-ish years. You've got to put that ish on there. So we had roughly 2,000 years of oral history. Okay. So after about 2,000 years, then we get Moses. After about 2,000 years of human existence, all of these stories were passed down through oral history. And this is important to understand because when you start looking, today we're not getting into the flood. Today we're actually only going to look at verses 6 through 8. But when you get into a lot of these other verses, we're going to touch on oral history today. But when you get to the flood especially, you get a lot of oral history. Every civilization across the world has oral history. And it's very interesting when you study not only cultures, but their histories. Oh, the word is escaping me right now. It's the study of cultures. Anyway, it'll come to me at some point, probably when I'm off of this recording, and I'll be like, oh, here it is. When you study them, you're going to see elements of Genesis in their oral history. And I firmly believe once we get to the Tower of Babel, that's where we're going to learn where the various cultures and ethnicities split and went across and around the world. And in every one of them, you find oral history leaking back to this knowledge right here. So roughly 2,000 years, the stories that we're reading in Genesis were passed down through oral history. Abraham's stories were all passed down through oral history. And so forth and so on, all of the cultures and civilizations. Then we get to, there were civilizations that started writing down before 2,000 years. But that's how long it was before Moses wrote down the Hebrews' history. Okay. And then from the time that Moses started writing Genesis, Moses wrote these first few books of the Bible here. From the time of Moses until the time of Christ, that's another 2,000 years. And then from the time of Christ until now, that's another 2,000 years. And so again, we have to use roughly 2,000 years, 2,000-ish years. Okay. All right, so there's that. I'll connect that now. I'll go ahead and take that back on right now. So as we find things in oral history, like I love to study archaeology, so I will periodically, I have periodically done some study on Greek mythology, and so that would include, their gods like Zeus and Venus, and that's getting into Roman spiritual history. But anyway, it's amazing to hear stories from Genesis that are in their stories. Greek's stories, Aztec stories, Native Americans from North America. It's just wild how oral history kept that alive so keenly. Okay, so we're going to get to verses 6. And God said, this is Genesis 1:6, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. So a firmament means a space. And so when it says, and let it divide the waters from the waters, And God made the firmament. In other words, God made the space and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. So what you have happening now is water, and then God created space. All right, in here, God created space. So now you've got waters above, you've got space, and you've got waters below. Okay? Now, we know when we get to verse 9, God said, let the waters that are under the heavens, so the heavens have water here. We've got the space that would be sky, and then the earth. Now the earth is completely nothing but a ball of water. Okay? And then in verse 9, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. So the first thing that happened before God created land and had the waters separated from the land was he made this space that was between the earth that was now just a ball of water, and then water here. So I want to talk to you about what this water above is likely. Now, the options that we have are clouds, or when it's describing the water above, that could be a poetic description of a rain reservoir. Now we know from the Noah story, which we're going to get to in a few chapters, we know from the Noah story that it had never rained on the earth. And something else we're going to learn as we read through the chapters of Genesis is how long people lived. And we're going to learn how that there were giants in the land, that there were some humans that were giants. Of course, we know hundreds of years after this, even in the time of David, we know that there were still DNA producing giants. Okay. So let's talk about what some creationists who are in the field of science talk about what this firmament above is. This is from astronomer Donald B. DeYoung. Now, this is just one source. There are so many others who talk about this in much detail. I enjoy listening to it so much. My brother, Pastor Jason, I think because of homeschooling is when he got really into this. His kids love dinosaurs, and he wanted to make sure they had a biblical foundation. And he really got into the defense of creation. And so he's got a lot of knowledge that he is able to convey about this. So we know from Genesis 2, verses 5 through 6, that there was no rain that came on the earth until the flood. And in Genesis 7:11, it says that whenever the flood came, it says the floodgates opened. And so there are, this astronomer is one of many who feel like that firmament above, the waters above, then you've got the firmament, then you have the waters covering the earth. That water above was a canopy that surrounded the whole earth. It was a whole canopy. And again, because we're talking about oral traditions being passed down, there are many ancient cultures who have oral traditions telling of a canopy type phenomenon above the earth. And that surrounded the earth. They describe it as a vapor or a smoke, like a fog that was always a canopy above the earth. And so we also have much evidence of a warmer earth in the past. So we didn't have winters. We didn't have extreme heat, but we had a warmer earth, probably along the lines of Florida. I spoke in the last recording about humidity. So there is evidence of a much warmer Earth, and the 4 instances are: there are fossils of palm trees in Alaska. Palm trees in Alaska. There were found the remains of crocodiles in New Jersey. We're not talking about in a zoo. We mean fossils. They had found petrified wood, as in where a forest would be, in the desert. And so in Genesis chapter 8, verse 22, this is after the flood, and this is the first record of seasonal cold and heat. Cold and heat is not mentioned until Genesis 8. And something else that is interesting about this canopy is that if it were a canopy, those who have studied the use of canopies say that it would have increased atmospheric pressures, perhaps doubling its present value. And so this would help explain the mystery of flying reptiles such as pteranodons. Again, that's an extinct dinosaur. Also, this canopy may explain the longevity of life that we read about in the Old Testament, and also giantism of plants and animals that are found in fossil records. And we know from present day science that increased air pressure can be very beneficial to health. There are some surgeries that are performed in high pressure areas for the cause of the surgery. They do this in high altitudes where the air pressure is more dense and is stronger. So that is likely, personally, that's where my faith falls, is in this option of there being a canopy. But again, there are other options, and that is that it could just be speaking of the clouds, and it could also be a poetic description of rain reservoir. So as we go along in Genesis, as I've heard of oral stories that I feel have leaked out of the oral traditions and were passed into Greek or into European cultures or into Asian cultures, I will mention those as I come to them. But that's all I'm going to do for today. Thank you for joining me. God bless. Have a good day.